Welcome everybody. My name is David Buckley. I'm the Director of Programs here at the Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project. I'm also grateful to be here, and I'm especially grateful to be here with my colleagues and co-panelists, Bianca Van Heydoorn, our Executive Director, and John Pace, our Associate Director of Reentry and Engagement. Welcome to everybody in the chat. I want to take a second just to set everything up before we jump in. Um, I'll take a second to introduce YSRP, give you a little bit of background on our organization, and then I'm going to hand it over to John Pace and Bianca to introduce themselves, say a little bit more about how they came into this work and the work that we do together, and then we'll jump into the webinar. So a little bit about YSRP. At the Youth Sentencing and Reentry Project, we work to keep children out of adult jails and prisons, and to bring home people who were sentenced as children to die in prison. At YSRP, we envision a world where all children have the resources and support needed to grow into adulthood free from racist carceral systems. And so that's a little bit about our organization. That's both our mission and vision. And in this webinar today, we'll be focusing specifically on the latter half, our vision statement. At YSRP, it's really fundamental for us to be thinking about the world that we want to be living in. And reentry is a huge part of that, right? Bringing folks home is one thing, but relationships don't end there. It's really important for us to continue relationships and be intentional about supporting folks when they come home. And so we'll take some time today to discuss a little bit about our reentry processes and approaches, both to this point as about a 10-year-old organization, and then also how we're rethinking reentry moving forward in light of obstacles we faced in the past and how we want things to look moving forward. So, yeah, John Pace, do you want to take a second and introduce yourself for us?
Yes, my name is John Pace. I am the Associate Director of Reentry and Engagement. I've been with the organization now going on 10 years. I had the fortune of meeting the founders while incarcerated. And I remember when they started this organization, I remember reading an article that told me about this organization that would be focused on mitigation and reentry. And it was an illegal agenda. And I said, "Ooh, I can see myself doing that." And so when I was blessed to have the opportunity to come home, they offered me the opportunity because they thought that I could contribute something to their mission in terms of keeping young people out of adult jails or supporting them if unfortunately they had to be incarcerated. And so I've been grateful ever since because I'm doing the work that I love to do.
Mhm. Bianca, will you please say a little bit about yourself as well?
Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome. So grateful to be here and see friends and fam in the chat introducing themselves. I'm Bianca Van Heydoorn. I'm the executive director here at YSRP. I've been at YSRP for a little over 4 years now, and I came to YSRP after launching the City of Philadelphia's Office of Reentry Partnerships. And I'm really excited was a fangirl of YSRP when I first got to Philly, and now have the privilege of working alongside some brilliant colleagues and doing amazing work that we're excited to share with you today.
hmm And just a little bit about myself. As I said before, I'm David Buckley. Friends call me Dave, and I'm our director of programs here at YSRP. I come to this work from a background of education, and I've been here at YSRP now for about the past 3 years, a little over 3 years. It's really been a blessing. It's been a joy and getting the chance to work with young folks on a regular basis is yeah is something that I certainly don't take for granted. So I run our programs, of which we have a handful, and programming necessarily ties into our reentry work. So John Pace and I work closely on reentry in conjunction with Don Jones, Ike, our reentry coordinator, and Bianca, helping to supervise all of us. So yeah, I think it's about time to jump in. In thinking about how to best start this conversation. One thing that always comes up in conversations regarding reentry is the term recidivism. We hear that thrown around a lot, especially in this kind of work. Oftentimes, uh, institutional partners and folks in this industry think strongly about recidivism as a way of measuring reentry, how well somebody is doing in their reentry process. But Bianca, I'm curious if you'd be willing to share a little bit about why recidivism is maybe the wrong way to measure the effectiveness of programs that are serving folks who are returning from periods of incarceration.
We starting off hot with my favorite subject.
Yes.
I think, I can talk about this for hours, because I think it really is, we've made a huge mistake at using such a narrow measure. But, generally recidivism is meant to communicate a person's subsequent interactions with the criminal legal system after release from incarceration. And that's precisely where the problem starts. It's a flat binary measure that's not uniformly defined. At best, it leads to, imprecise and inaccurate conclusions and ineffective policies and programs. And at worst, it lands on already vulnerable bodies. It destroys individuals, families, and communities. Because it's such a flat, narrow, binary measure. So that's just kind of the starting point. I want to make a plug for the National Institute of Sciences report, The Limits of Recidivism, because I think it really, really distills why this is such a problematic measure. And I want to highlight some of the recommendations they made, because I think it really is a strong report. First, it's a flat measure in that it really looks at the universe. It looks at the fourth and the 400th arrest, conviction, incarceration. So it doesn't make distinctions in ways that help us really understand why someone might have subsequent in interactions with the criminal legal system. It's binary, where it's just was this person rearrested, reincarcerated, remanded? It's just a yes or a no. And it's only relying on administrative data, right? Which we all know, if you've been in this work for more than 45 seconds, that administrative data has lots of errors in it. For example, a arrest may not lead to a conviction. A remand might be for a technical violation. So it's not actually measuring the things that we think that it's measuring. And then you add on to the fact that people, whatever metrics people use to measure recidivism, are not uniformed as well. Some folks will talk about recidivism as a subsequent arrest. Some people may talk about it only as a subsequent conviction. Some people may mash all of those things together. So it doesn't allow us to get at the nuance that then would support us making good decisions about how to do programming or how to support people in reentry. And then from a pure research standpoint, it doesn't allow us to measure apples to apples. It doesn't give us the depth of information we need, right? And so some of the recommendations are, very simply, make sure every time you use that word, you're defining what you mean by that, right? So it helps give people context. Name the limitations, name that it's all administrative data, name, right? That's just good research practice. And then supplement that binary yes, no with measures of desistance from criminal activity and success among multiple domains. If we're looking at, okay, if someone has had a subsequent interaction with the criminal legal system, what does family support look like? What does that person's civic engagement look like? Um, just because someone has not gone back to prison or has not experienced a subsequent arrest doesn't mean that they're thriving. They could be living under a bridge and not go back to jail, right? They could be living in a community that isn't as policed as the community that they left. There are all of these ways that it's a bad measure, and then it doesn't take into account discriminatory policies that box people out of access to resources that they need to thrive, right? It doesn't talk about, having to check a box on a housing application. It doesn't talk about the lack of access to culturally relevant services. It's just challenging on every different level. And instead of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, we really need to drill down and account for the ways in which people are moving towards thriving and the ways in which our current non-strength based ways of measuring things, for a safe for work way to talk about this, don't actually get us the information we need, and the resources we need to actually support people thriving.
Yeah, appreciate you shedding light on that, Bianca. It's helpful to get your perspective as somebody who, is very familiar with, just principles of reentry, but then also, the kind of the academia side as well. And the research and the theory around how best to bring folks home and, to your point, have folks thriving. While you're during your response, I saw a really great question from Lindsay. Lindsay, thanks so much for your question. It actually reminded me about a housekeeping piece that I forgot to share. That's on me. There's actually a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And so as folks have questions, we would ask that you would please add questions here to the Q&A feature. And then at the end of the webinar, our conversation, we're going to go ahead and read through the Q&A to make sure that we get to y'all's questions. So we appreciate y'all and absolutely please, enter in your questions there and we'll do our best to get to those at the end. In also considering your thoughts, Bianca, one of the things that you mentioned that really stood out to me was um, your remarks about nuance or lack thereof, right? And it made me think about the things that I actually really appreciate about how we approach reentry here at YSRP. Earlier when I was introducing us, I mentioned that, we've had challenges with reentry, and that's absolutely something that, we'll address in this webinar. But one thing that I think is also really important to highlight is, ways that things have gone well. And, here at YSRP, one of the things that we really value and place a lot of importance in is nuance when it comes to reentry work. We don't believe that, one size fits all when it comes to reentry. Sometimes organizations will have, a very systemic approach that ultimately might miss nuances in what folks really need to thrive and what they need to feel supported. And so our approach to reentry here at YSRP, it starts when folks are incarcerated. The work that we do almost necessarily is going to have folks who are doing some sort of time, whether it's county time, at State Road or potentially state time across Pennsylvania. But we believe that good reentry work begins there as opposed to when folks come home. So we do, in our reentry practices visit our client partners often. We are in frequent communication with them, both via video visits, but then also, we will actively travel upstate multiple times a year to go visit client partners who might otherwise not have any type of visits because of how far they are from home, usually being Philadelphia. So those are opportunities for us to build relationships, which are the foundations of the reentry work that we do here, right? And in one way or the other, we're all impacted by carceral systems. And so the impact that we've all experienced, whether for someone like John Pace, who himself is system impacted, or someone like myself, who is not directly system impacted, but has been impacted by the system. So I have not done time myself, but have had many loved ones do time. And as a result, we are able to use those visits as conduits for really allowing ourselves to get to know folks, and figure out how best to set folks up when they come home, in their reentry plan. So usually about 6 to 8 months before somebody comes home, we'll help sometimes, if somebody's going to visit the parole board, we'll help them with a parole plan. We will set up housing opportunities for folks, whether it's with a community partner, or whether we're, communicating with family to make sure that folks have, stable housing when they return home. We will really go through all of the different areas that we believe are necessary for somebody before they even come home. And so that way, when they come home, we can really hit the ground running. Um, During the actual reentry phase, when folks come home, previously we have paired somebody with a reentry coordinator. So we've had reentry coordinators on staff who are the touch point for our client partners. When they need something, they know who to call, they know to whom to reach out. And that ends up ultimately giving them a strong support system in their reentry coordinator. And so, reentry coordinators will help client partners get their driver's licenses, their IDs, they'll help set them up with jobs. And like I said earlier, housing can sometimes be an unstable factor for folks when they're coming home. And so housing is something that also our reentry coordinators will help with, emotional support, facilitation into programming, both within YSRP and with community partners. Reentry coordinators do it all. And so to this point, that's mostly what our reentry work has looked like here at YSRP. But to the point of this whole webinar, we're starting to reimagine what reentry looks like. And in light of that, I think it might be helpful, Pace, if you'd be willing to share a little bit about why now, right? We've seen YSRP's community evolve for about a decade now, and so I'm curious why you think now is a really perfect moment for YSRP to start to rethink and reimagine our approach to reentry.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. And I think you gave a nice, history of the way we functioned, and still function somewhat now, but thinking about shifting a little bit. And I think we've probably been like, I hate to use the word victims, but we've been a victim of our success. In a way that like we've done I think a wonderful job with regard to relationships. Our reentry is steep in relationships, and client partners know that they can rely on us to support them in this process. And I think knowing that we have this relationship that I refer to as having in perpetuity, is in perpetuity, it's forever. We tell client partners that we're here until you decide that you no longer needs us. And oftentimes we never get them to say, they never say we don't need you anymore. And so this what happens is this starts to create this overwhelming capacity problem that we have with regard to client partners who are not measured by the success, but they are doing well. They're doing well and measured in a way, whether they went back or whatever. They're not measured in that way, but now after going through all of the challenges that they have gone through, now they're doing well. And but yet and still they're still client partners. They're still a part of the YSRP community. And oftentimes what I get sometimes is some of these individuals have friends and they say, can you help my friend as well? So this is what we get. And so we realize that we just can't do that as an organization. It is a serious capacity problem, and yet and still we recognize the quality of the work that we do, that we would like to have, I think, a broader reach. And so this causes us to begin to think about the way in which we do the work that we do. Because even though we recognize that we are steep in relationships and we will continue to be in relationships with client partners, even if they are graduated on, because we still value the relationship and they will be always be a part of the community. But we realize that it's important for us to be able to support others who are also going through similar challenges. And so, in thinking about that, I think it causes us to think about how do we shift our model a little bit to be able to support other young people who are just as much in need of the support that we can provide to young people who are being challenged in the city of Philadelphia and the surrounding communities. And so I think, and this is appropriate time. We're 10 years old, as you said, Dave, and I think it forces you're sometimes forced to think about ways in which you could grow. And I think Bianca said it well. You keep some of the things that you recognize that you do well, but you make little shifts on things that you realize that you can improve on. And I think at this juncture of our development as an organization, I think we are being forced to think about this shift a little bit.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, and so Pace, it's as you were speaking, one thing that also came to my mind was, you mentioned you've been home for what, about 10 years now?
10 years. Don't take my going on 10 years now.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that. And I was reflecting on just what a blessing it is that you're home, but then also thinking about the laws and how they've changed in order to make that a possibility. And so, Pace, I know that you're familiar with the Montgomery versus Louisiana decision of 2016. But Bianca, I was also thinking about the Commonwealth versus Lee decision that recently came out, and I was wondering if you might be willing to speak a little bit to how that recent decision also impacts this current moment and how that might influence how we're looking at reentry in light of the ways that the political landscape is changing here in Pennsylvania specifically.
Yeah. So the Miller and Montgomery decisions really made it unconstitutional for uh, a young person to get sentenced, automatically sentenced, a mandatory sentence of life without parole on a first degree murder charge. And that was really huge in the life cycle of YSRP because we were, at our founding, really supporting a coalition of people and being a part of a coalition of people who allowed for the resentencing and release of so many so-called juvenile lifers, right? And that was monumental, especially in Philadelphia, where we are the city that sentenced more children to die in prison than any other place in the world, right? Um, and what that also meant, huge victory. Folks like John got to come home. Folks like our other colleagues and friends got to come home and immediately started contributing to a more just world and better reentry practices for everybody. What that also meant is that there were folks, many of whom who were under the age of 25 at the time that they were convicted and incarcerated, who were still inside that didn't benefit from the Miller and Montgomery decisions um, because they were there on a second degree murder charge, so a felony murder charge where they may or may not have been the person where they were not directly responsible for um, a homicide that occurred. And so the Lee decision is a Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision that will allow for the resentencing and return of over 1,100 people um, in the state. That then is now this new cataclysmic opportunity that we have to bring even more people home. And and support the notion that children should never be treated like adults by the criminal legal system, and that, to my earlier point, nuance and context matters. And so as we're thinking about how we want to imagine reentry, we really want to be, again, working with our partners in the field to support folks coming home, to support both, either or both, a legislative remedy for how we're going to get people home, but also be prepared for a like boots on the ground training and supporting folks to participate in their release if it has to come to a mass resentencing effort. And because of that, like our work has gotten bigger, and we are, committing resources and our experience navigating the Miller Montgomery releases to support the effort that's happening statewide to bring folks home under Lee.
Appreciate you, bringing light to that, Bianca. And I actually just shared a link in the chat that has it'll direct you to our YouTube channel. Actually, last month we did a webinar on f what freedom after Lee might look like. And so, if y'all are interested, please feel free to check that out. Our colleagues Annie and Margot, we're speaking on that with some of our client partners, Jamie and Amina. So yeah, please feel free to check that out if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Lee. And also shouts out to our community partners who are also working on that with us. Abolitionist Law Center is one. Folks are doing really great work, and there's a lot of work to be done, but it's a blessing to do this in community with folks. Yeah, let me actually send this to everyone.
Mm. And I would
I
just
actually
like
don't
to
think I can
say,
send this to everyone, so I'm gonna let somebody else put this in the chat. But moving on with the conversation, Bianca, one thing that I was thinking in consideration of what you shared, we haven't really spoken about thank you, appreciate you, Jessica. We haven't really spoken about what our new imagining of reentry might look like. And so, thinking about what Bianca shared with the Lee decision and how that might impact a whole bunch of folks coming home, hopefully relatively soon. And then also what Pace was sharing, in light of the intense one-on-one relationships that we really endeavor to foster with young folks who are coming home. Those are both factors that we've taken into account when thinking about what we think reentry could potentially look like moving forward. And so one of the things actually that we've been working on here at YSRP is something called the Thriving Framework. And to be clear, the Thriving Framework isn't something that has come out of thin air. Ultimately, we recognize that there are a lot of folks who have, done this work before us, and so we're not ones to try to co-opt what other folks have done. Rather, we've just been trying to take some of the research that we've done on our own, and then also taking the lessons that we've learned in our work over this past decade, and weave those together to have a concrete yet nuanced understanding of how client partners are thriving when they return home. So this thriving framework, as it's called, essentially builds some key domains where we see some of the biggest challenges for folks when they're reentering, and helps us better understand those different categories to assess how well somebody's doing when they come home. How close are they to thriving? And so some of those different domains, those buckets, as we like to call them, we love the word bucket at YSRP. So some of those buckets, one is goal setting and agency. That's also in line with our organizational values. We really believe in self-determination of client partners. And so while we support our client partners in their reentry process, ultimately our client partners take the lead. And that's a way for us to encourage them to exercise their own agency. So we have a mutual responsibility agreement program through which client partners will set some long-term goals and then work with reentry coordinators to set shorter-term goals in order to achieve those long-term goals. And then we incentivize our client partners to achieve those goals because they might otherwise not be. And so goal setting is one category of how we see somebody in their approach to thriving. Um, Caring adult connection is another category that we have. We have economic and educational engagement, which is obviously huge. Um, how long has somebody been able to retain a job? Are they earning a living wage at their job? Are they enrolled in job training or getting their GED? And That's also an opportunity for us to work with community partners as well. We're a small organization, and so we're really grateful for the folks around Philadelphia who support our client partners in achieving apprenticeships and job training, work ready programs, and so that's something that we're really grateful for. But the last two buckets that we have for this thriving framework are stability indicators. So those are just kind of basics like does somebody have stable housing? Do they have cell phone access and Wi-Fi access? Have they gotten their ID? Have they gotten healthcare? Do they have access to reliable transportation? And we acknowledge that some of those things might be outside of somebody's um, control, right? Ultimately, whether the L comes on time might not be something that a client partner can determine, but having access to all of those different stability factors is important for whether somebody can really thrive. And the last category that we have for the thriving framework is emotional regulation and healing. That is going to be data gathered through self-reported emotional growth. We currently already have surveys that we send out to client partners to solicit their thoughts on how they're feeling, how they perceive themselves, how they perceive their growth, all of those things. We also have a program called the Intergenerational Healing Circle, the IGHC as we call it. And Through that program, we have a handful of younger folks who have avoided long-term incarceration, and some older folks who, are guys who have come home from decades of incarceration. And it's an opportunity for them to get together and speak about, what they've gone through and support each other. And we'll get into that a little bit more as well. Pace, I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit about that. Yeah, just to kind of put a bow on this, that's just a little bit of a brief introduction to our thriving framework. And so ultimately, our hope is to be able to um, continue to build out this framework, right? It's helpful that there's already been research done, but we believe that there can be more research done. And so, it would be it would be awesome to have the chance to work in collaboration with some of the institutions around Philadelphia to continue this research, to back up this model. But then also, we're hoping to be able to scale this and have each of these categories quantifiable in order to give client partners a better understanding of, how close they are to thriving, but then also to be able to communicate the impact that we're having to external partners and to the community in general. So, Bianca, sorry, did you have a thought that you wanted to share, or was that just a
No, I was literally scratching my head.
Gosh, that's my fault.
No worries, thank you.
So Pace, just now I was talking a little bit about the IGHC and how one of the ways that we think about thriving is, in emotional regulation and in healing. Um, and so, obviously that's for anybody, healing is something that's critical to, how somebody shows up in the world. And in light of that, I was curious if you could speak maybe a little bit to how our implementation of this thriving model and this thriving framework, how that might actually impact the experiences of our client partners who work directly with us.
Yeah. Um, so just to like to give some context in terms of what I generally did in terms of how I worked with client partners. And because, I am one of the reentry coordinators, I get the pleasure to be able to spend time with them prior to being sentencing, so I get, built this relationship, all through that process. If unfortunately, if they have to go to a state prison or do county prison, most likely a state prison or come home, but most likely state time. And I get to go up there and visit them, and I sit down with them. I get the opportunity to hear what are their goals that they have for themselves, and these goals are what they're thinking about now because this could change, as they continue to grow while serving time. But I get to be in partnership with them during this particular time, and so all along I'm going through that process with them. And then, fortunately, when some of our client partners do come home, I get to talk about those goals that they set for themselves and say, how could I support you? How could YSRP support you in these goals that you have for yourself? And they become a part of the YSRP community at that time, with me being the primarily one to support them to identify those goals. And one of the programs that we try to get young people involved in is the IJC, which is the Intergenerational Healing Circle. And this is important, in terms of them being involved in this and being able to like think about what their experience has been is because I give like a little personal story for myself. I remember when I was only 17 years old and I was sentenced to die in prison, and I was trying to wonder why me? Why did this happen to me? Because I didn't think I was like just bad person. But how did I find myself? I knew that I committed a harm, but how did I find myself in these circumstances? I couldn't make sense of it. All it felt like, to try to give you a visual sense of, it felt that I was a young person doing natural things that young people do, playing football, playing around with my friends. Then I find myself involved in activities that seem to be normal but were actually harmful, but they were normal in our community. And then ultimately finding myself committing a harm that caused me to be locked up and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. And it seemed like my life was gone just like that without me having any sense of agency about the direction that I wanted to go. I was following trends that I thought were the norm. And so I wanted to make sense of this while incarcerated. And it was through me meeting older individuals sharing with me books and reading about like others had gone through this experience. Particularly, I thought about Malcolm X. I read his book, Man, Child, Promised Land, Claude Brown, Nathaniel McCall, Make Me Wanna Holler. I was reading all these books, and they had similar experiences, but their life ultimately turned out to be something different and better once they came out. So the question was, why did we find ourselves in these circumstances in the first place? And so those are the questions that I think dogged me for years. And I started to put it together in terms of systemic issues that exist in marginalized communities. And but still I never knew how do I have this. This is like, to think about this, hang with me for a minute. How do I make sense of this when in fact I was still responsible for harm? How can I say these things happen, but yet and still I was responsible? I couldn't wrestle with that. I didn't know how to wrestle with that because you were told just simply take responsibility, and so I had to wrestle with that. And I think the more I started to involve myself in programs that allowed me to really grapple with that more, I started to understand it a little bit better, and to recognize that uh, both can be true, that I could exist in a system that commits harms or allow harms to take place because of structural inequality that exists. And I could also have committed a harm that I should not have committed. And so the both things could exist. And so the more I wrestled with that, I started to develop language, and I started to be able to direct, I think, my understanding to where I thought these issues exist. But I never had, like, I had few individuals that I could talk to in prison about this subject. And so one of the things we were thinking about in the IGAC was that this could be a space where individuals who have found themselves involved in the system can begin to wrestle with these kind of issues, the traumas that existed in many of our communities. And really the goal was, how do we tease out these things so that we could build power in that collective knowledge that we share with each other about what our experiences were. And so that was like really the impetus of the IGAC, was how could we bring together a collection of individuals who served a significant amount of time when they were when they were children, and young people who didn't have to serve that same amount of time, but still also had some level of contact with the system. And it wasn't that we would be going in to mentor these young people, but we will be going in to have a collaborative learning experience with each other. And so that was the whole goal of the IJC. And I found out that through that experience, we were actually really learning, like truly learning in a sense, from one another. Because young people have questions that, oftentimes I think we take for granted. We think we know everything, and we don't really take the time to really listen to them. And we were forced to really listen to young people in the perspective that they had. And so, to your point, Dave, how will it change? I don't see it changing that much because I think relationships are extremely important in the work that we do. So the relationships will continue. I think really what the goal is ultimately is, how do we expand the relationships that we have? How do we, with the young people, how do we begin to expand these relationships? And so that's really where I see the changes will occur, where I might be the one initially supporting young people in that initial transition, but how do I connect them to a broader community where there's multiple resources available to them?
And I think that's the key point of how our shifting is, how our thinking is shifting, right? And how we're reimagining reentry. Prior, we had our client partners had a primary relationship with one person at YSRP. That relationship was until they said they didn't want to be fam anymore.
Mhm.
Um, and we made referrals, of course, because we have amazing community partners, but we kept the primary relationship. And as we leaned into our value of learning and we went through a strategic planning process, we realized, number one, that that was ballooning caseloads and it was going to affect our ability to bring in new client partners, right? Secondly, that when we thought about what positive youth development research says, some of this emerging research that we're talking about around thriving, that we were missing an opportunity to actually expand a young person's network beyond us. That is, the wider your network is, the wider your resources are, the more likely you are to thrive. And so our new thinking is that you're going to have a primary relationship until you meet some of the things that Dave laid out a little bit earlier, and then we're going to expand your network within the programs that exist at YSRP, but also listening to you and what you need and what those goals are, and continuing to build partnerships with other people so that those referrals can happen to values aligned organizations that are thinking similarly, and not just, and this is the part where I throw shade at some organizations, and not just check a box that a kid got an ID so that they can send that to the funder and get a check, right? Really, really making sure that we're leaning into what are the ways that we can support young people in taking the next steps in their development and be a trusting and supportive adult in their lives.
Absolutely. Thanks for lifting that up, Bianca. I really appreciate you highlighting that, to Pace's point, right? Things aren't changing too much, but there are things that will change. And ultimately, I think that the thread that I'm seeing between what both of y'all are saying is the emphasis on community, all right? This idea that for Pace, in his lived experience and in his work with the IGHC, community is so important. And with Bianca, what Bianca's highlighting is something very similar, right? Where having a one-on-one relationship with the reentry coordinator is important, sure, but then also having a more robust community of folks who can help you stay accountable to yourself and who can, provide more opportunities than just one person. That's ultimately how we get folks to thrive. And I will add also, um, as we continue to develop this model, one thing that we're also really trying to do is fold client partners back into the organization, right? So in our previous model, how we were imagining reentry was, folks would come home, they would reenter successfully, they get their job, they get a house, they're doing their thing, and then eventually they spread their wings and go off and do something else. And we certainly still want that, but ultimately we're trying to be more intentional about having the experience and that phenomenon of a client partner spreading their wings also help the other folks who are coming up through the rest of our model, right? So having we've instituted graduations where client partners, who have achieved this highest level of thriving, they're graduated. And now instead of being the client partners who are, reaching out to us for support in certain areas, now they're the experts. And so we're working on trying to bring them back into the fold and better incorporate them into, reentry workshops and into programming, so that that work is influenced more heavily by client partners themselves, who at this point have been with the organization and can attest to what has and has not helped them with their own reentry. Um, I have my eye on the clock, and I see that we're running a little bit low on time, and I want to get to our questions. But before we wrap things up, Bianca, would you please close us out and tell us a little bit more about why you feel like this is an important next step for YSRP?
I mean, I think for a lot of the reasons that we highlighted, and I'm really ready and eager to get to questions, but for a lot of the reasons that we highlighted, right? We are learning some things, and the whole history of YSRP has been learn from client partners, learn from research, learn from our lived experience doing this work, adjust and get better, right? And so, we're at that moment where we've learned a bunch from our strategic planning process. We've learned a bunch from conversations and experiences with client partners. We have Lee coming up that is going to expand the work and have a drain on our capacity, like, and we're ready to level up. So this is the moment for us to take things to the next level. Um, and the more we can like learn and refine and iterate, the better we're all going to be as practitioners, as client partners, as partners.
I
Oh,
appreciate that.
and I think this learning, we
No,
also
please.
have a desire to continue to share what we learn through technical assistance, through all of those things. So the more we're refining, the more we're going to have to contribute to the field.
Yeah. I'm actually so glad that you mentioned that last point about our technical assistance work. In light of us shifting to Q&A, I saw a question here in the Q&A section that says there seems to be a lot of good work by YSRP to support individuals once they return home. Does YSRP or any other organization that you work with support young people and their families to prevent a lot of the violence and crimes that we see leading to these long sentences? I think that's a great question, and that actually actually makes me think about our technical assistance work. Recently, at YSRP, we've launched this work that gives us a chance to help train other organizations, community organizations, in how to create their own IGHC programs. So John Pace and I have been spearheading that effort, and we've recently partnered with Philly Truce. Shouts out to Philly Truce. And we're going to be working with them. They are an active anti-violence, violence prevention network, and we are going to be working with them to help create healing circles in an effort to, both spread our own, impact, but then also to support folks in their healing, sooner in their life's lives, as opposed to, not getting to start healing until they are already incarcerated. My colleagues can absolutely, speak to some of the other good work in the other organizations who are helping with some of the anti-violence work. I'm thinking about PAN, Philadelphia Anti-Drug, Anti-Violence
Yeah.
Network, Abolitionist Law
You
Center,
can think about yeah, Philly.
yeah,
Yeah, Philly. Yeah,
Philly,
definitely work with young
YASP,
people to keep them out of prison. Yeah.
right. So there are a lot of organizations, and Bianca, if there are, did we miss any? Or okay, yeah,
Yeah, you did because there are a lot, but I just wanted to say that we need them in this work, right? What we need is people occupying every lane so that we can be pushing against a system that pushes at us in multiple areas, multiple domains. And that's why we need those partners because our unique contribution is the intersection of children and in the adult system and the legal advocacy that they need in court and after. So yes.
perfect. Um, Another question, Lindsay, I want to get to your question because you asked this a minute ago. You asked, are there reliable tools you recommend for measuring persistence and success in this context? I'm actually thinking about answering your question with a question, and I may not be able to do this in real time, but that was at the beginning of the webinar prior to us really going through the thriving framework. And so I guess my question is to either Lindsay or to whomever else is with us. We're curious to know y'all's feedback as we've laid out this thriving framework and discussed the transitions and the changes that we're looking to make with our model. Ultimately, we really believe in, as Bianca's highlighted, learning is really important, and learning comes from others. So if you're in this webinar and you have thoughts on things that we might have missed or ways that we might be able to improve. We even have some client partners in here, so y'all got our numbers, but feel free to put it in the chat. You know what I mean? We would love to hear y'all's thoughts on whether y'all think that this could be a reliable tool for measuring success in this context.
Mhm. And I think I also heard, I'll give Lindsay or others a chance to chime in there. I think what I also heard in that question was like, are there proprietary assessments that would get at this? And I am very careful about endorsing proprietary assessments. And I want to also go turn back to um, the recommendations in the report that I referenced earlier. I think the North Star should be an interdisciplinary kind of single tool that works across domains. And I with a slight caution that sometimes when we do that, we over rely on those tools in ways that don't account for people's lived experience. But I think, there are things like, nope, I'm not going to do it. I was about to do it. So I think that there are currently tools within the mental health framework, within understanding, a housing first model, for example. There are things that exist in those domains outside of the criminal legal system that I think we should be looking to in the interim. But what really should happen is people who know and understand this work deeply because they've lived it or they are working in it really should be getting together to put our brains together to come up with a multidisciplinary way to measure thriving and success and desistance.
Yeah, Dave, I think Lindsay responded.
Yeah, just I was looking in the chat. Thanks for your response, Lindsay. I see you're a PhD student at WashU. Um, yeah, so we're glad that you're in agreement with us on wanting to have more positive facing measures, and where in terms of where to start, I guess when we've been faced with a similar question, and in collaboration with our client partners, really where we've looked to is kind of like basic needs first and then taking it from there, right? Ultimately, unfortunately, we live in a society where human rights are not guaranteed because they're commodified. And so, housing, and, food access, healthcare access, there's so many different needs that are hard enough to gain access to if you don't have a record. But if you're coming home, that increases the obstacles to gaining access to necessities by a large factor. And so, as you'll see in the Thriving Framework, we've tried to lay out some of the really important needs for folks to ultimately live a life in which they feel like they're thriving, whether that be, community connection, emotional regulation and healing, economic and educational engagement. All of those different factors are things that we see as really critical for folks in terms of how they might be able to measure their own positive success in reentry. We're just up at time, but in our last minute, I want to get to these last two questions. And Pace, if you would please, I would love for you to answer these. We have two questions about programs that we might be aware of that help folks prepare for release prior to their release, and folks that are doing reentry work already. Pace, would you please speak a little bit about maybe some of the community partners we work with, or who, as associate director of reentry and engagement, who do you tend to turn to when looking for support with reentry?
I look to CEO. CEO is like a good, reliable program that's been around for a long time because they do a lot of like soft skills, but they also provide job opportunities. And so they're one of the one of the most reliable that I have. And it really, as you said earlier, Dave, it really is contingent on the individual. What are the needs? Because I also have like a therapist that I have contact with that I can always reach out to. So it depends on what are the needs of the individual, because some individuals come out that might have a connection with, they have a family member that's going to connect them up once they get connected out. But so their needs might be therapy. So it really is dependent on what the needs are. I think I am familiar with that group that was identified. Meet me at the front door, meeting at the front door. I think I am familiar with them uh, somewhat. I've heard the name before somewhere.
Mhm. Mhm. Wonderful. All right. Well, we want to be mindful of folks' time. We really appreciate y'all joining us for this webinar. We're 1 minute over, so apologies for that. But just saying again how grateful we are that y'all joined us on this beautiful day. We know y'all could have been outside doing a bunch of other stuff, so we really appreciate y'all tuning in and spending the afternoon with us. Thanks to everyone who joined, and we hope all of y'all stay safe and have a
Yeah.
wonderful rest of your day.
Encourage people to reach out though if they want to share information that they think could be helpful and useful to us.
Absolutely. All of our emails are on the website. So please feel free to reach out should you have any questions or input that you'd like to share.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.